can do whatever you want to do. This is,
No, I was in the middle. This is where I was depending on the sunlight to tell me when it was time to come. It's like, oh, it's going to be almost dark because it's 5, right? I'm like so used to it being.
Why are you using? Do you use an abacus still? Like, what are you?
You know what, Brandon?
Trust say.
I try to, I'm like trying to go, more holistic. I don't think it's going to be that holistic, but I was out talking with my mom about like stuff. And then I was like, okay, hold on. I need to just communicate with people. And then I realized it was like 4:50. I was like, shit. Like, me doing the most like I usually do.
I understand. The most.
So I think it's just gonna be the 3 of us again.
Mm-hmm.
The recording we were gonna do was
well, we can still do it. I mean, that's the main reason I wanted to record. I mean, we could still talk with 3 of us, unless you're all like, I know everything about race there is to know, so there's no need for us to have this conversation. I don't know.
Pretty sure that's why I started Spaces to.
So I feel like we can still learn from one another. Like you just 3 of us, somebody else might come in, but we could still be on topic. Unless there is a audible you're calling for a topic that's more of interest to you.
No, I kept it. I kept it with living in the construct of race. I think we spoke a little bit the other week about kind of what that meant, or we started getting closer to it. And I think the 3 of us would bring a lot of good perspective just because.
To the circle.
We make a 3-person circle. Kind of lopsided, but but yeah, I mean, Rachel, are you good with it being recorded?
Yeah, fine with me. I was planning on it being recorded. I know you can tell by how I dressed today.
I know, me too. I was like, I didn't get a chance to put makeup on, so we're just gonna do it. But yeah, I think if anything, then I mean that's the whole point, is just the vulnerability of not really knowing what you're gonna get every meeting is just, but the time is set aside to have the conversation. So yeah. I think regardless of how many people, I can have a conversation all on my own half the time. So
I was gonna say, we can do this. I'm not fazed by a low turnout. And like I said too, it's like the students I'm working with, I don't want this just to be a situation where it's like a political action and I'm just helping them fight against racism, and either they win and rename the school, or they just go off and they had this great attempt. I feel like there is an opportunity here, especially since racism isn't something they were born with. Obviously, this district, because it's comfortable with having a Klan member on the name of the school, has allowed racism to gestate there for an extended period of time. And the fact that they won't remove it from the school, and we're finding more and more information about how they are protecting school board members who are intimidating people to give a certain kind of vote if a vote is ever taken. There's some deep-seated issues there about race that are not being talked about on the surface, but decisions are being made behind the scenes. So that being said, with these students in this process, I can show them, like, here's what systemic racism looks like. And people aren't just going to come out and say, I'm racist and I'm going to do this because I'm racist, and I don't like you people because I'm racist, and I'm passing this law because I'm racist. That's not how it works. It works by people saying, I'm comfortable where I am right now. There are things I could change that can make things better for different sections of people. This isn't bigotry in general. There are things I could change to make things better for different sections of people, but that's going to be inconvenient for me. That's going to be difficult for me, later on down the line. These are conversations that I don't like having, so I'm not going to do anything. And that's what we're running up against. And because it's not, Klan in your face, go back to Africa, build a wall because it's not that overt behavior. It's easy for people to be like, oh, well, he's in a tough decision. He's in a tough place. You have to understand, there's people around him that feel this type of way. He doesn't feel this type of way, but the people around him do. And he has to echo, their feelings, their sentiments. So even if they're doing something that's really off base, really racist, he is just the mouthpiece. He just pushes the buttons.
So I think one word that comes to my mind when you were explaining that is like, or I guess the question that is like, what are we up against? And then in my mind, I go to like covert versus overt racism, right? So there's that part. But also what came to mind with you describing that is, and thank you for keeping that off camera since we are recording.
You're welcome.
So the like awareness. Other people's level of self-awareness, I think, comes into the picture. And just because we need awareness that people don't necessarily know everything.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing, though. It's like we all say that. Like, that's like a statement everybody says. No one knows everything. No one knows. You're not the smartest person in the world. Who are you to think that you know everything about what's going on? Like, we make these statements all the time to one another, appreciating our ignorance. But then we want to dig in hardcore. Apparently, like, what we do know, we must really, really know. It's the ambiguous stuff that we claim not to know about until it's problematic. Then we claim to know that shit too. I don't understand how it works.
Right. Well, I mean, because awareness, then we all have this, we're aware that we don't know everything, but then when actually challenged with being in a position of like, oh, we don't know this thing. Remember, I think last session we were talking about the concept of loss, like situational loss of, the identity of knowing. I'm just kind of making that term up, to be honest with you. But like under the awareness that like, oh, this is a situation where we don't know stuff in, right? We can say it, but then when it actually comes to us in the moment, it causes us to become defensive. That's a biological response because our identity is our knowledge is now it's in compromise. We go in defense mode. That's biologically ingrained in us. So that's why I think, racism is a mental health discussion.
Well, I agree. Oh, go ahead. Well, I agree. Go ahead. You go. You going to
agree with me or you want me to go to
I agree. I want to agree. I want to add on. So let me finish so I can add on to what I'm agreeing to.
Well, now I can't because now I got distracted and Adderall's worn off. So I can't.
Okay.
So why don't you go ahead and agree, and then I'll add on.
You'll come back.
I agree.
Okay, so we're agreeing. Okay, all right. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's a mental health issue, but the problem is it's a mental health issue on top of a pre-existing delusion, and so. That race is a real thing that you need to conflate with your identity. Like that's what we are. That's the first thing that we were taught, when we were born, you're stamped like white woman, boom, white girl,
white baby,
who will grow white baby, who will grow into, a white woman, so it's like you grow with this construct attached to you with no scientific pretense for attaching it to you. And then you're told that you're supposed to defend this construct, by any means necessary. This construct is challenged or whatever. You're supposed to push back in some regard, or you are not being true to that very same identity. And peer pressure comes into play too, because other people have bought into this construct. So whenever you aren't doing what you're supposed to do in regard to your construct, other people look at you like, you aren't Black. You aren't white. Why won't you stand up? Why won't you sit down? Why aren't you on this side? Why aren't you on that side? And the tribalism it encourages that imposed systemic psychosis.
So, because right there though, and this is where I guess, my profession and where I feel how I visualize like our role as a therapist, I say our, because I'm like acting like Rachel's here is for herself. As my role as a therapist is I see, whether it's in this discussion about race or whether it's about dealing with family members, I serve the gap. The gap is usually a communication issue. And it's just how we end up interpreting, like, where one thing stops and the other thing starts, right? What you just said about being literally we're born into the construct right there. I feel like is just where a gap where people are going to get lost is like, what's the construct? Like, not necessarily, I'm not going to treat people like it, Google is really helpful.
But that's part of the equation. When you want to have conversations about what race, that pretense has to be laid out for people so everybody's on the same page as to what it is.
Right.
So start
with the construct then. What is, like, when's the first time that you come out of mommy's vagina? Let's just go ahead. We're going to use adult words here. It is a vagina. The vaginal canal. You hop out into the world and we land right in a construct, right? How?
Somebody labels you.
With what?
Your label. Race.
Race.
Yeah.
Your name.
Gender. Your gender. Your racial designation.
Those are scientific, but if we're talking about gender colors, it makes me think of all the gender reveal, like blue versus pink.
Yeah. Well, right? What gender they associate with your genitalia, because that's another thing too, is this baby isn't old enough to say, I don't feel like, a man, or I don't feel like, a woman. I want to alter my body, or I want to change my, self in some shape, form, or fashion. So that's a construct that's affixed to you. Your race is another construct that's affixed to you, but gender is at least based in some kind of scientific, reality, because, we're able to physically look at the genitalia and people, assume that that's your designation based off of that. But we recognize that gender is deeper than that. It's the genitalia, as well as, there's a brain component too. With race, there is no brain component, to race, because there was no scientific application. Our skin comes in all kinds of shades, our eyes come in all kinds of shades, our hair comes in all kinds of shades, and based off of where you are in any given continent, you can find any given combination of those things. Whenever race was invented, it was invented based off of a huge segregation that had occurred within the world. So you could say, okay, those are the Africans over there, they all look this way, they all have this type of hair or whatever, even though, and there was also some ignorance too, because they did not penetrate deep into those African tribes to find those distinctions, like, Black people with blue eyes. They basically went by the general standard, like, okay, well, most of them have brown eyes, so that's what it means to be Black. You have to have brown eyes, even if blue eyes pop up as an anomaly somewhere down the line, even if blonde hair pops up as an anomaly in some tribe somewhere. We're going to say every one of these individuals with these generalized characteristics is that. That's not the same way when it comes to gender or any of the other constructs we affix. Your name is a construct, so you're born into a lot of different constructs, but race is the one construct that is not based in science whatsoever. It was just based off of just straight observation by a couple individuals who made some straight generalizations and then passed that off as this is a thing, everybody kill each other for it now.
Right. And it's a way of arranging things, I think, is kind of the key thing that we get there for people. It's a way for us to make sense of why are we different and what makes us different, which in a lot of sense can be okay. But if we don't respect that it's okay until it's not okay, and we don't respect that limit, then I feel like this is where it crosses into the isms and the, I don't want to get too macro right now, but that is I feel like everyone's story starts somewhere, and it has to start that's where we have to now bring people back to their own individual stories of that's where everything that we know about this world is therefore learned. There's some that's naturally ingrained in us, but race is not one of them. Yeah. At this point, how you learn how to walk, you've watched your parents, you probably made mistakes, you fell down, you put your hand on a hot burner, you've learned the world, and you've also been learning under the construct that your parent circled I identified a certain race on your birth certificate, if I believe.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes they leave. Yeah, I mean, I think this. Yeah, for the most part, yeah, that's what's saying.
Now I ain't got kids, so I've never seen them.
No, I mean that's where it happens, and from that moment, that's, I mean, you begin to be treated, a certain way because you have that label. Even as a baby, like you begin to be treated that certain way. Like, if you have a white nurse who is bigoted as hell or whatever, and she decides, you know what, I'm not going to really pay that much attention to the black kids in here today, even without having, any kind of agency in that state, you're already being neglected. So, yeah,
potentially neglected.
No, I mean, it can't. Right. But then also, I mean, not just potentially. I mean, it's going to happen. Systemically.
Oh, it's going to.
Once you start talking about systemically, like, from the moment you come into the world or whatever, like, you may be born to a mother who's not given adequate, care, during her pregnancy as a result. So even in vitro, you're already being, labeled. Before you even come into the world, you're already being treated differently because your doctor is not paying attention to what the patient is saying, because he's been conditioned to believe that, black women can take more pain. So, you're totally fine. There's nothing wrong with your child.
And I agree with everything you're saying. I'm just going to see that now in my mind, I know we're being recorded. So I'm like, just want to specify, like, but
that's when you start over. Go ahead.
When you start overlapping, everything you just said is kind of an overlap of someone else's experience. Mm-hmm. Even though it's in vitro, it's their experience too. But it's like trying to like have people already come out of their own experience of like living in this construct because they're making sense of something that they didn't even know about before they were born. Now, that giving birth to their own child, that's a little different. But I just want to specify because like the asking people, like if we're going to get anywhere, we can't keep talking about other people's experiences with this. We have to talk about our own, even if that means we've never been like I, as a white woman, have not gone, first of all, I don't go to hospitals anyway. So, but like have not been mistreated or delayed in my receiving medical attention because of the way that I look. I have to understand that there are some people out there. Early on, people, I feel like if we're talking about what are you up against in this whole discussion of race, is you're going to be up against people who cannot separate an individual experience from someone else's experience in a way that gives credit to the other person's experience, right? Well, that's the whole thing.
But then that becomes problematic because there's individuals like myself who are able to advocate on my behalf because I am, coherent, I am lucid, I have the time, I have the space, I have the body of knowledge. I've done some of the mental work in spite of the designation that, I was given. There's not a lot of people like me. That's what I'm trying to tell you because of the issue of race. So that means that whenever I'm in a new space where I only see one of myself, and this has happened to me throughout my entire life, growing up in Kansas, all that kind of stuff. When I'm in a space where I recognize I'm the only person who's able to advocate on behalf of Black people, that's kind of a burden. But then it's also an obligation too, because if I don't speak about, the experiences of pregnant Black women, I have to go find a pregnant Black woman to bring in here in some way, somehow, if that opportunity presents itself. So that's why I'm mentioning, some of the auxiliary factors and experiences. Because they plug into what I'm saying, but they also validate the experiences of individuals who cannot be here for a variety of reasons.
No, absolutely, and I want you to keep doing that. Just specifying for like anyone who's going to watch this.
Oh, okay. Hey, everybody! I am not a pregnant Black woman. I just want y'all to know. Just want everybody to know. I'm not a pregnant Black woman. Just want everybody.
You have grown the ability to empathize and therefore advocate for those people in a respectful way, to know that you can't speak for them, but you can bring awareness and activism to those things. But like this conversation right here, right now is like, I want people to understand is like, in order for people to step outside of themselves and understand something that an experience that is not their own, they have to understand where they started and how they Like it's a constant process. It's a juggle to be able to do both, but you have to know where you stand and what your experience is before you can put yourself, be like, oh yeah, even though I haven't experienced that, that does make sense that probably would be something that happened to me. I'd be pissed. I'd feel invalidated. I'd feel it, right? You've done that work. People watching this may have not. But it is work, right? And now I got lost of where we were even going with that.
Well, I mean, you were talking about
the construct. And
that's what I'm saying. It's like we have to have a baseline in order for us to discuss something. We have to have a baseline as to what that is and what that means. Whenever I start talking about race, I clarify. I am a human being that has been labeled Black. That's a mouthful and a bunch of shit to say, and it's a pain in the ass. But if you're going to talk about race, you have to recognize that is separate from me. I'm a human being that has been labeled Black, that was raised in Black culture. There are some people who are labeled Black who are not raised in Black culture, but they still are recognized as being Black by the system, because a cop doesn't pull you over to ask if you're listening to Leonard Skinner or Tupac before he shoots you. He has already made a decision if he considers you a threat because of his innate racism as to how he's going to treat you before he even gets out the car, if he's seen you in profile or something like that. So race is a tricky thing to talk about, because you have to talk about where you're coming from in regard to race. You have to figure out where the individual you're speaking to is coming from in regard to race. Because if you say, to some white people, no, you're not white, they'll get adamant and they will be ready to fight you, because they are so wrapped up in that identity as being part of them, that they don't separate the construct from themselves. And that's more of a problem than anything else, because it's like, now it's like if you said you were a Santa Clausian. Like, I don't know how I deal with you if your whole life, and you're willing to kill and murder for Santa Claus, and you are determined, to make sure that, wherever he goes in the world, there's a chimney, and people who don't put chimneys in their houses, they're going to the gas chambers. Like, if once you are in that place, and I'm negotiating with the Santa Clausian, I can say, yeah, I agree that Santa Claus was a thing, like, December 25th, like, I'm about the presents and shit, but we don't need to go that far. And you're like, ho, ho, hell, we're going all the way there. Like, I can't work with that. And so that becomes a problem. We have to figure out that baseline. And that's why some people can have this conversation and some people cannot. And I don't know if those people ever can, because
we're not going out into the ever right now.
Okay. All right. Well, optimism. I'm just trying to say
it's borderline optimism. I try to keep it like realistic, because if I tell them like, oh, well, they're never going to do that, that's self-fulfilling prophecy 101.
It's not self-fulfilling prophecy. It's reality. Like, we all exist on a spectrum, right? So there's some people who are just never going to get shit. Like, they just won't. Whether they choose not to, whether they're physically incapable of. If you have somebody who has serious brain damage, if they are able
to my wheelhouse, don't tempt me here.
I'm not trying to go in your wheelhouse. Let's talk about reality. If for some reason I damaged your brain excessively, right? We recognize that. We recognize that is a possible thing. People go into comas and they don't come out.
Yep.
So your brain can be altered in a way that causes you to function in a way that is not as optimal as you are right now. So we recognize the brain can be altered. So it also means that brains are different. My brain is different than your brain. If you've had some kind of brain damage, your brain is not going to function the same way that my brain does. So if we embrace that fact, we embrace that reality, we recognize there's differences in the way brains operate. If there's differences in the way brains operate, then there have to be, on the grand scheme of humanity, some individuals who can't comprehend the separation between race and identity. They can't comprehend these deeper concepts. And so if you're trying to explain this to them and say, hey, you might not want to kill a bunch of Jews because your skin is bright, they'll be like, what? Like, this is what I do. I'm a white Nazi. This is what I do.
So I don't disagree with you, but I do have one concept. And that's why I said in my wheelhouse is like, my answer goes to neuroplasticity.
Oh, shit.
So that's where it's like, that's why I said it's not quite optimism, but realistically, neuroplasticity is a thing. Is we have the ability.
It is, but it's not fucking. What? I feel like you're controlling me right now. What are you doing?
I am. Well, you interrupted me. So
what was that?
I was just
okay, I did. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Neuroplasticity. As you
now, it doesn't take into account the amount of time that is needed to address this issue. But I do agree with you. There are people who are going to be less likely to have a change when it comes to understanding racism and stuff like that. And there are like cognitive issues, like active lifestyle. I mean, there's just going to be people who are more resistant. But if I say never, the reason I correct my language that way is, I mean, I see it, maybe it's because I'm a therapist, but if I say I will never be able to get through to these people, then I will actually do the things that will likely end up triggering a situation to come about where none of those people are either going to be present or able to actually hear me.
Well, here's my situation. Here's the flip side of that coin. If I say everybody has the ability to change, and I'm going to delve into the neuroplasticity of, this whole, coliseum of racists that's gathered for this Trump rally, then the individuals that I can actually change, the individuals who are actually making the effort to change, I can't dedicate as much time to them. I'm busy wading through the Klan. And not making any kind of headway. So I'd much rather utilize my time on those individuals where neuroplasticity has been exhibited in some shape, form, or fashion and say, okay, you want to grow, you want to have this conversation. It might be difficult navigating it, but we can at least do that. I can work with that. I can work with you. And so this is where, whenever it comes to having conversations about race, you get a bunch of people who end up, preaching to the choir because they already came ready to go. They already came ready to embrace something different. They've already said to themselves, you know what? I need to do work on myself. I don't understand everything, or I have some knowledge to give. So I'm going to go to this group called Perspective Circles. I'm going to have this conversation and I'm going to grow as a result of that. Mm-hmm. So we're all here in the same accord, Troy. And I'm not saying we aren't benefiting from this exchange. I feel like I am. That's why I'm back. And I also want to contribute and also grow this to bring in other people. But, I don't know if we're going to bring in Reggie Racist and change his life, because Reggie Racist don't give a fuck. He just likes being racist. And that's the kind of individual that I'm saying, neuroplasticity be damned. If society benefits Reggie Racist, even if he gets it, he's not going to get it because people getting it doesn't benefit him, which is where the root of real insidious systemic racism exists. And that's what we're fighting. We're not fighting people like you and me who are just like, I don't know. I'm like on the fence in regard to how I feel about race.
Can I, so you're right, but that's why, and maybe I'll repeat it because we didn't record any of like the other sessions, is like the reason that I created this space and bringing a therapeutic perspective to things, because that's one that's not commonly put out there.
I'm with you.
So people understand individually what they need to do to be able to go up against these people that are going to be not in the neuroplasticity arena.
Yeah.
But why we're using social capital within our own lives, in our own families, and our own perspectives and our truths as a way of cultivating change. The goal here is not, I know this is it's very slight from very, very slight actually, it's not a contradiction, but it's right up against it, is that you can't change people, but you can model a way of speaking and an opinion that helps people actually hear versus trigger all of the natural defense mechanisms that keep those people prepared and only listening to their own narratives. That's another component that's up against this. Now,
but then and the flip side of that coin is.
So wait, one more thing.
Go ahead.
I was very aware of when I created the space and the message that this is different than how the other people's approaches, which are very needed. I told you, I don't even remember when it was, but I remember you tweeted about it and you said that, well, I was like, maybe you should like dial back on your language to not like exclude certain people. And which made me realize like, no, because there needs to be a space for people who do take more of an aggressive approach to this, who will like actively, because time's still going to go on. This is not something that one conversation is going to go and it's going to alter the course of, you know, how our universe operates. But if we all have these different types of conversations, some more aggressive, some will probably feed right back into the cycle of racism. But we also have other outlets such as this one, using our own personal like perspectives, understanding our own and someone else's at the same time, if we can handle it, to that's what goes back into our networks, the people that we talk to at like Dollar Tree, if it happens to come up, you know, like that, what energy we emit is what changes what goes into the system. We make up the system. We can't go change all of these, the construct of like the political system like that, or else other things are going to fall apart. That's just my opinion.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, I do agree that it takes all kinds. My only what?
So my last point.
Oh, you already know. You all know when you're done. Like, okay, are we done? Okay, all right. Your last point
is that when we, as the people that make up the system, I'm the person that walks in the door and, you know, into the hospital, and I have to treat a person there of color who, you know, a certain way. That's what changes the systematic racism. There'll be some political changes that need to be made, but if we can get the people who actually have personal opinions making professional outcomes of like what policies are passed, that's my goal here. That is what that's the gap, right? Okay. That there's activists out there in protesting in the streets, which is needed. Hopefully no one's getting hurt in the process. But anyways, now you can go ahead, Brandon.
That's what you're protesting for. Like, I mean, you know, it depends on what you're protesting for. Like, you know, on January 6th, you know, if you were, you know, protesting, you know, you were only, you know, hurt. Two people, an officer died, and then like one woman died because she went through a window or she got shot. So yeah, like, you know, there's that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it does take all kinds. But whenever you're talking about like the systemic stuff, like for instance, case in point, with the group I'm working with out in Kansas, I'm working with alumni, I'm working with faculty, I'm working with students. And the faculty are hamstrung not because they don't want to fight systemic racism, they don't want to push back, you know, they're hamstrung because the chair of the school board is literally conducting whisper campaigns online to the constituents in order to generate a grassroots movement counter to the rename initiative that's already been generated by the students. So you have a school board member violating his ethical obligation to protect the students and protect the staff by going out there and saying, hey, you know, I like the name of the school. Don't you like the name of the school? We should keep the name of the school. You know, I hear that there's teachers like, you know, getting these students all riled up. So whenever I'm fighting that, it's not, and whenever the teachers are fighting that, they're not, we're on the same page. We recognize something needs to change, but you have people who are ingrained who want to preserve, because I mean, the Klan leader who founded the school, you know, the school was founded in 1920. So, I mean, he's long dead. But these people who are attached to the legacy, attached to the history, who don't like the idea that there's individuals of color who are suggesting the change, who are in charge of pushing back and saying, hey, we don't want to have our Black students, when they play sports, have to wear the name of a slave owner on their jersey when they're on a basketball court over across town in front of other Black students. So now not only are you traumatizing that athlete, you are also offending a whole other team. But you have a whole population of individuals who don't have that neuroplasticity, I guess,
Wait, why don't they have it?
I don't know. They just choose not to. They don't want to execute it. They don't want to do it. It's in mass. There's enough individuals there who could say, "Hey, we want this board changed." But whenever we approach the school board about it, first, this individual's, "Oh, like I said, I can't do anything. This is my constituency. I'm not going to speak bad about a school board member, even though he's done something that is egregious in regard to representation of his population."
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to hide behind the voters. Well, he was voted in. So I can't really say anything about him as another school board member. I can't say I share his sentiments, but that's just him. All right, cool. You want to take the coward's way out? You don't want to step up? All good. We go and we hit another school board member. Well, I sent emails out to everybody. I only got responses from 2 people. So I'm sorry to say that, I feel like Carl's words, Carl's actions, while offensive, while loud, are indicative in a silent manner of the general consensus of the board. But don't tell anybody that. I'm telling you that here, letting you know that. So that means there's a whole bunch of people who are keeping this one individual or individuals because they're working together. You got people who are I'm just going to, hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil. I'm not going to say anything. I didn't say anything. That wasn't me. I didn't do that. You have these people working together to keep things exactly the way they are in their own different ways. And so they know what they're doing. Since you want to talk about neuroplasticity, they know what they are doing. And
I brought it up technically to give you.
I know back doors.
But I will talk about it because it's not that they don't have the ability to. I would say, biologically, if you have like a TBI, traumatic brain injury, you're not going to have as much ability to create those new neural pathways. But then, and at least what my brain goes to, it's not that they don't have it, is that they're not surrounded by enough people to actually promote the process naturally. They're around like-minded people, and there's a lot more to protect for staying the same than there is to let difference and change happen.
But they're around like-minded people voluntarily. They create an environment that encourages them to only be surrounded by like-minded people. That's what we're talking about in regard to this. The name of that school is the name of a Klan member. People who do not, it's the opposite of a bat signal. Do not come here if you are of color, because we venerate, honor, and respect the history of the Klan here. That is put up on this school here. So without us saying we're all racist, the fact that none of us are saying that needs to come down, and we are actually pushing back against anybody who says it needs to come down, that's the good old Midwestern Topeka, Kansas racism. And it's gaslighting in the worst extreme. Like, it pisses me off because if you ever say something to them about this is racist. This is racist. No, that's history. That's history up there in that building. Why is it history? Well, Fred Seaman, founded this district.
Well, anything can be considered history.
Exactly. So Fred Seaman founded this district, but there was before Fred Seaman was here, that land that it was founded on, stolen from Native Americans. Why can't we go back to that history? Why are we stuck with this history here with the Klan member who was active in the Klan, not even a Klan member, Klan leader, and we have evidence of it? Why are we sticking with that history? What is so nostalgic about that history? And then it comes to this, then you get down to the asinine deflections. Well, if we change the name of the school, you can't change history. The fuck? What did I say I was going to be doing that? Where did anybody say we were doing that? And then it keeps on coming up over and over and over and over again, reverberated. People repeating the same damn thing. You can't change history. I don't understand why they're changing history. What? No one said that. I didn't say that. I've said this time and time again. You can't change history. I'm with you. We can't change history. I agree with you. Now, can we change the name? Because it's causing pain to people right now.
Right.
But you can't change history. What the fuck? I can't do that.
All right. We got with the fucks. You're running into a roadblock, which seems like, and now I'm not that I need to justify this, but the understanding that I give people isn't necessarily a cop-out for them. It's more to keep my own reaction from becoming my problem. it angers me that people would therefore in turn, like, they get so it's not tunnel vision. It's almost just like it's very narrow, because when we realize, and I'm not saying that they actively will realize that they're doing wrong, but at some point they don't have an answer, which is why gaslighting becomes a thing, because we, in order to deflect away from our truth that we now have been proven is not accurate, but we don't want to admit that, we protect ourselves.
Then that's magical thinking. The whole thing is, that's magical thinking. That's the definition of magical thinking. I'm going to create a false reality right here, right now, in front of your face. I'm going to create the poosh ninja smoke bomb. Like that's
also dependent up to the person receiving that truth to not react to it and realize it's not true. Let them do themselves all the time. But if I react and to be like, no,
well, the problem with that is it'd be different if your reaction or that mindset was contained to you. See, so you saying that can't change history, that'd be great if you took that little wagon and pushed it or pulled it wherever the fuck you wanted to go. But the problem with that is when you're talking about racism, you are now taking that reality that's fake as hell in your head and using it to dictate how other people should be treated.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying you can't change history. So as a result of me saying you can't change history, even though I know that's not what you're trying to do, and I'm gaslighting myself and gaslighting you, I'm going to make sure that laws are passed so you literally can't do anything to address your grievance, which is legitimate. Because my grievance, which I pulled out my ass, to keep myself safe, to make myself feel comfortable, to give me a reality I can enjoy. Like that one, that trumps, pun intended, your legitimate grievance. And so that's what you're talking about when you're talking about like systemic racism. It's creating a nice, comfortable bed for all of my delusions. Mm-hmm. And basically codifying it, putting it into law. And they're expecting everybody else, if they have a problem with it, to ask me a very specific way. Excuse me, sir, you seem to have generated a police system that is a little bit more violent than it should be to people who look like me based off of this delusion you've embraced. Excuse me, sir, could you please tell them to stop being as violent to us, because we don't believe in that delusion the way that you do. We respect your delusion, but we're just telling you. And then you still get no as an answer. And so that it's that much more traumatizing.
And I agree with you. And I can't necessarily stop that. But what I can point out, at least from the way I see it, at least in the discussions that I have with, I haven't been up against like the really neuroplasticity resistant people in a while. I did a little bit in the Facebook groups when I, had time, but is that when you fight fire with fire and say like, and completely take away someone's reality, even if we perceive it's wrong, I'm here with you, I perceive it's wrong. But when you take that away from someone, like, like a, what's it called? A freaking tablecloth from underneath a full set of dishes, shit's going to crash.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. That is not my problem. The fact is, if it's one thing if I'm engaging a child, I'm like, hey, you know what? Race is not a thing. Let's talk about the construct. It's all good. But if I'm talking to a grown-ass man who has lived like a grown-ass child for a long time, probably. Well, that's fine. The fact is, he still may either we are acknowledging free will as a choice, or we're saying that it's not. And so, if I'm dealing with a grown-ass man who has had every opportunity in his life, as he's been going through his life, to learn to grow, but instead has chosen to exploit and fuck over, mm-hmm. then I can't. That's not my responsibility to be gentle with his tablecloth when I yank that dish. Like at that point, I'm giving a fuck about his feelings. I'm telling other people this is what needs to happen whenever you confront this, because this is not a legitimate way to think. I'm dealing with the end result. I'm not dealing with somebody who is willing or is likely to engage and grow from this encounter. We are at a point of conflict. We have bypassed any point of negotiation because you think I'm a nigger. I can't do anything about that right now. Especially if you're talking about if you think there's hostilities coming at me, I'm definitely not going to be like, wait, put the gun down, put the noose down. Hold on a second, let's talk about this. No,
but Brandon, hold on, time out, because I was responding to, you started telling this story with a group of students who are up against teachers. Now we're talking being in front of a gun and which
it's the same.
Absolutely happen. I get that. But that is not an intervention. That is not an intervention I'm giving my response to. I'm talking about a conversation with people. Yes, they're going to be resistant. But if you go up there with now you're wrong, your way of thinking is not legitimate, and you don't find some ability to bridge the gap, then in a situation where you have the luxury, it's a luxury at this point, or the privilege to be able to bridge the gap, when you go up there and be like, no, you're wrong. And you need to reevaluate everything that you know about the world. Yeah, that's going to be a situation that you just, I just said, if I show up and with that approach.
We're also assuming good faith. We're also assuming a good faith exchange. We're also assuming a good faith conversation. I want to go back to my students again.
I'm not assuming anything. I'm not even in the conversation yet. I'm talking about the beginning of the conversation.
Exactly. I'm talking about the beginning of the conversation too. So you are making a conscious effort, to prepare for a dialogue about race. I'm making a conscious effort to prepare for a dialogue about race. This individual over here is saying they're making a conscious effort to have a dialogue about race. However, they're being disingenuous. They have a perspective. They're not here to learn. They're here to advance their goals, right? Mm-hmm. But they're letting us know that they're here in good faith. So as we're having this dialogue and this person is dropping random things in because he's got an agenda.
So do I.
Yeah, you do. But then how do we engage that person? Well, how do you detect, first of all, that person is disingenuous in regard to their communication? And then how do you engage that person knowing good and damn well they have no intention of changing? Because you're dealing with, it's called crypto-fascism. People acting aloof, how do we know Black people don't commit more crimes? We really don't. All the jails are full of people who are of color. So, logic, right? Black people are in jail a lot, so they must commit a lot of crimes. Are anybody with me here? You guys see this with me? And so everybody's on board, Stan, he made some pretty good observations. There are a lot of Black people in jail. Well, they must be criminals. Yes, exactly. That's what I've been telling all you guys. They're criminals. Now we're having a meeting later on. Bring a sheet, and I got a cross I'm going to burn, and I want you to come and we'll just talk about it, okay? Boom, recruitment.
You started out real okay, I was following, and then we went to
oh no, that's how racists work, though.
And that's
how modern day racists work. They get in there, they make buddies, and they infiltrate situations just like this. They infiltrate school boards just like we're talking about, run for me. I care about all people. All lives matter. I love America.
Oh, absolutely. And I get that. But the thing that first of all, if I get confused easily. So that's, I guess, not a good gauge. But I feel like this is kind of, maybe this is just how my mind is making sense of it, but circling back around to this awareness piece is what do you do when you're in a situation like that? One, you have to know and be prepared that those are people out there, and you have to hear them, but you can't necessarily believe everything and play right into the agenda that they have.
I don't.
I'm not speaking to you.
Oh, those people.
I know you don't.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm speaking to you. But I know you don't necessarily, you have your own set of beliefs and you're strong in them, but that's not everyone. Mm-hmm. Not everyone. That's why this space is here, is if you're not even sure about your beliefs or even your knowledge of something, don't speak to it. But if you're going to be going up and having these conversations with people, probably some of your family members, you have to know enough that you won't necessarily react, and to the point where you don't end up saying anything, or fall it try not to basically do a whole freaking session on the damn drama triangle right now. There's a whole principle of in my field is the drama triangle is essentially the fuel for pretty much any kind of miscommunication and outcome where gaslighting ends up happening. And if you're not aware of that particular dynamic, then yeah, you're going to feed right into that and get invited to one of those like cross-burning situations and not really realizing it at the same time.
So you're saying for this theoretical individual, this is their mindset. They need to be, I guess, like mentally, like armed to be able to push back against the drama triangle. Is that what you're saying? Or,
I mean, armed is
mentally,
I think prepared. That there's preparation in anything. So having these in terms of, and then getting in your situation where a reaction happens poorly and aggressively, it's going to send people in opposite directions. So yeah, one side of this, and I believe it has to be our side since we're advocating for the right. Let me rephrase that. We're advocating for the healthy side of, human rights and racial justice. We have to be the ones prepared that these people do not have just open doors, be like, oh yeah, come here, sell me your ideas and let me take them in. We have to be just as strategic as them in their construct that they live in, which is different than ours. That takes a level of awareness of our own journey, one, which we got away from, but that you have to realize there is a certain pattern to how these people think, and activating it unintentionally is not going to help us get in there and actually end up having a conversation.
Well, the thing is, you're assuming that I'm implying that we activated in these people. Like, I mean, they're coming self-activated. When I'm talking about these people who are racist, like they came with an agenda. They aren't waiting to be racist. They are racist. They just haven't opened their mouths. They're looking for an opportunity to sneak their racism in. And you have to be able to detect that and push back on that immediately, or separate from that situation immediately, which means that you have to have a language and understand the construct of race so you can talk about that significantly. So here's how I find it, like whenever a racist is in a conversation and makes some offhand reference, like, why do black people ... My question right back then is, who are you calling black people? Like, what do you mean? Well, the black people, they like, which black people? Like, how are you defining it? How did you know they were black? Well, because I saw, this and this and this. Like, well, I mean, like, those characteristics exist in a lot of people. Like, how did you know that they were black? And forcing them to actually go into what they use to affix that label, then we can get to the bottom of why they're trying to affix it.
So one of the things that I thought about, little segue, but hopefully it connects itself. But when you and I were talking yesterday about kind of preparing for, the audience here is, we're going to talk about where the construct starts. We just talked about that earlier, but we don't have the time to necessarily walk someone through that process. But part of the that's the thing. People want to gloss over that and start having a conversation after the fact, and that leads to more misunderstanding. I didn't necessarily say don't touch on it, but don't walk them through, that's their own work. Like, that's the work that they have to do. Maybe they don't do it, maybe they don't, they do. But we have to acknowledge that, first of all, people don't understand or believe, not even necessarily understand that race is a construct.
But you missed. That's what I'm trying to say. That's the learning opportunity. And you're missing the part that I was talking about initially. You're dealing with the racists who came to the table with a preset objective in mind. And so he's willing to take a certain kind of question. He's willing to take a certain kind of prodding and a certain kind of query in regard to his worldview. He's not willing to take other things that actually dig into the concept, that dig into the construct and do that work that you honestly really should do before you even have a conversation about race. And that's the problem in this country, and I would gather to say around the world. There's more people who are willing to hop into these conversations because they're like, I've been white all my life. I know what it means to be white. I know what race is. Let's have this conversation. I'm on team white. Let's do this. You got more people who are willing to do that than say, hold up, how did I become white to begin with? Like, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm. Which, it needs to happen, but I'm just saying,
And so that's why whenever you are engaging and you are dealing with somebody who's having an issue in regard to the construct itself, you need to examine the baseline that you're operating from first and foremost. That does require some hand-holding so we can all be on the same page as to what we believe. So whenever Carl over here gets belligerent about his bullshit, we know, Carl ain't got everything there. Because Carl, thinks, white people, were made by angels in outer space. And, that's why they have the right to hang anybody on the planet. That's what Carl believes.
I will say I was making an assumption, which would be that we realize that there are certain conversations that don't need to be had with certain people.
Sometimes they do. They do. They need to be had with certain people. I will still engage a racist, even though I know a racist isn't going to be able to, is not going to give me the fulfillment of change. I engage racists, not in private.
Totally.
I engage racists publicly. I don't go and seek out racists to talk to racists and be like, hey, let's have a good conversation and have a good argument about race. No, I don't give a fuck about that. There's nothing I'm going to gain from that. It's just negative energy for nothing.
Right.
But if I engage a racist in a public venue where other people can see that racist and I can ask that racist the questions that I told you that poke holes in that racist ideology, then that racist who might have gathered some following initially would be, hold on a second.
I think we've been saying the same things, just like slightly off from each other.
I mean, we are to a certain extent, but the thing is, that's the teacher. I gotta call her back shortly. We are, but the thing is, in order to there is, in my opinion, and I'll advocate for this every time, because you have to establish where everybody is. You have to find the racists among you if you're going to do any kind of work. And so that means that you're going to have to ask these questions and make sure everybody's on the same page. Because if you don't make sure everybody's on the same page, then you could be thinking that you're making major progress, or you could have this covert racist among you who is waiting for you to slip up, make a mistake or whatever, or just leave the room, or go into a private session or whatever, or just basically be moving among you, recruiting as they can, as people get understandably upset because they're going to be having these difficult conversations. And so if you haven't established that you're in a safe zone where you're dealing with people who are trying to have authentic and genuine experiences by asking the questions of those individuals present, then you are leaving that door open for individuals to, covertly undermine the very thing that you've done, you've come here to do.
Sorry, I'm playing out a thought of, this discussion, I think, makes me think of like recordings, like what are people actually taking away from this? What I'm taking away from it is that like, I need to like narrow down tangible like steps of, or just concrete points of how you have conversations with people. In a from an individual perspective, like if you've done enough of this work, it's a hard work, but it's enough to like, you have to know that you're constantly going to be doing work. That's part of the work, is that because you're going to be making room for new information that you receive in every transaction you have with someone. But what are some of like the core steps of like, how do you deal with like someone who is covert? That is a very manipulative strategy right there. It seems very intentional for someone to sit back and to just, like, all right, because they're sizing you up, just like that's exactly what I'm saying. When you fight fire with fire, I don't mean like aggressive with aggressive. I just mean like sit back and take an inventory of like how people, I guess, for lack of better terms, to manipulate the manipulator is essentially where we're going with this. Is that there does have to be a strategy. So that gives me another to do.
And that's what comes from asking the questions. I don't go when we start having a conversation about race, I don't tell people, yo, race, this is what, it is right here. Like whenever I identify somebody wants to have a conversation, I don't lead into it. My thing is like, well, how do you define, like, what race are you? Like, how do you define that? Like, what's your belief system? And then by asking those questions, you can figure out where somebody's head is. Racists slip up and they immediately start, regurgitating their stuff because they have a spiel. They're trying to sell their race. And so after you hear enough racists talk, you'll hear the spiel. After you study, white supremacist iconography and symbology, you start to understand the messaging before it even comes out, because they presented it showing up, just like Norse mythology. White supremacists love Norse mythology. So if you see an Odin rune on somebody's forearm or whatever, they're not a fucking Viking. I can tell you that much.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So you have to understand who you're dealing with before they even come to the table. We don't analyze, and we haven't done any reconnaissance because we've gotten used to saying those are those racists over there. And so over time, you start to forget what those racists look like, what they sound like. And as they're over there, they're in and ostracized, they recognize that some of the things that they do isn't palatable anymore. We got to switch it up now. We got to take these robes off. We got to figure out some other way to sell our white supremacy. We got to repackage this. We got to whitewash this. And so, instead of saying this about Black people, we'll call them welfare queens. Instead of saying this about, criminals, we'll call them thugs. Like, that will be our code language. That will be our, so, when I say it, and you say it, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we know what's going on. Jewish space lasers. Ha ha.
What was the last one?
Jewish space lasers. Look them up. They don't exist. Marjorie Taylor Greene was advancing that bullshit white supremacist false deal. But we all know there are no Jewish space lasers. We know that, right? We recognize and accept that. There are no Jewish space lasers causing forest fires in California. It's absurd.
Oh, so that's like recent.
Yes, it's quite recent.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But Marjorie Taylor Greene has no Klan outfit on. She's not walking around, talking about putting Jews in ovens. She's not. That's crypto-fascism. That's her walking around, letting everybody know, I got you back.
Research.
I got you back. And so to regular people, you hear that and you're like, this woman is fucking crazy. That's just nuts. It's absurd. Who says stupid stuff like that? Cover your ears, kids. This woman is dumb. And you keep on walking. But somebody who has these anti-Semitic views hears that and says, haha, that's funny. That's my girl right there. So, like I said, she came to the table with an agenda.
Oh, yeah.
She came selling what she wanted to sell. But because you were not equipped and you did not study and you didn't pay attention to what was going on, you weren't aware of the fact that you were dealing with white supremacists. And so you gave her a platform, you let her talk, you engaged with her, and then you become part of that ruse too. Look how well, Sarah got along with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Like, they seemed great. Like, they should do more stuff together. And you're like, Marjorie, come back on the show. We had a great turnout. There were a bunch of people that came out.
See, I guess this is actually, the first time I've actually considered this more of a limitation than a strength here is that
you can't
do very well. I do very well as a therapist with getting along with people that
I know you
no intention of understanding, like at my core.
But the thing is, when you're dealing with people who are manipulative like that, they can see that. They can stroke that ego. They know how to talk to the devil. Like, they know how to look at the worst part of you, whether it be your ego, whether it be your racism, whether it be a desire, greed, you want more money. Because when you're dealing with authoritarianism, it's about power. So they study power from a bunch of different dynamics. That's all race is. Race was invented
for power
as a power structure. We look at it as, oh, it's identity. You got brown skin, you're Black. Oh, you got light skin, you're white. No, that's not why it was invented. A bunch of people were just sitting around saying, you know what? Yeah, we need to figure out something, that we can use to, make sure that, we all remember who we are. That's not what they said. They did that because you started having chattel slavery prop up, and you started having, people enslaving individuals, and enslaving has happened, since the beginning of the time. Slavery is not new, but in regard to chattel slavery and basically using human beings as beasts of burden, no opportunity of release or earning freedom or anything like that or whatever. We're talking, we're going to own you. We're going to own your kids, and we're going to own your kids' kids. When you talk about that shit, You got to be able to get people comfortable with the idea. So race was the first propaganda. It was the first big lie. And people adopted it. And so now when you're bringing in this whole family chained together and you're ripping the kid away from their mom, no, it's just like a cow. Like, that's not a human being. That's a negroid. That's not even the same species as us. They're fine. So what we do to them, not a problem. These other people agree with the same lie. We're all agreeing with the lie. We're cool with it. We actually wrote it down. We have a paper.
Okay. Trying to collect my thoughts here.
I got you. I understand. It's a lot. But the thing is, you can't negotiate with that kind of evil. Because the thing is, these people are not motivated. They know they lie.
Which is why that's why I left you to do that part on your forum, right? Like, because it's needed. Like, if I'm speaking for myself, like, the direction and what in my life I have to deal with the profession that I have, I don't have the capacity to put that as much energy that you put there. I mean, it's exhausting. I see you do it. I'm exhausted reading it. The amount of energy, like, yes, because there can't be there has to be a straight up rigid, like, no, that's not, that fight still has to go on while we in the background are doing the process work.
The thing is, in the background, what has to happen is there has to be, in my opinion, there needs to be a cessation of the both sides mentality that having these viewpoints are acceptable. We don't do that with anything else in regard to our society. We don't do that. Well, pedophiles, like, just think about it. Like, it's just a different way of expressing your sexuality. It's just, they're just like, children, they just like the people they want to share relationships with to be a little bit younger. And that's okay. Like, that's just love, right? Like, love is love. Like, we don't do that. But when it comes to racism, it's like, okay, well, people just have different worldviews. And, it's just different. We make apologies for racism that we don't do for anything else. And that's part of systemic racism, is we're sitting here saying, it's okay for you to be uncomfortable whenever we call you a racist for being racist, being offended, being upset. That's a side. That's like, that's a valid point of view. Whenever we call you and we say you did something wrong, whenever, you lynched that little black boy over there, and the people who agree with you for doing that are racist, it becomes, oh no, we can't use that term. People are just too uncomfortable. We cannot use that, anything but that term. Okay, we will not use that term. The R term, not that. It's off limits. It's off limits. Okay, just want everybody to know we have different worldviews, and this black child is dead as a result of a different way of thinking.
So, agree with, at least I hope this is not going to come off as a contradiction. Mm-hmm. But I do agree with everything you're saying. Like, we can't let that way of communicating and understanding continue to happen. But I think, like, if I'm going back to the sex offender example, is like, you're absolutely right. Like, we as a society, we don't put up with that. However, part of me individually is that when we boil it down to the nitty gritty here.
Well, actually, I'll take it back. As a society, we do put up with that. We just don't openly put up with that. With racism, we openly put up with it. With pedophilia, we covertly put up with it. We had a pedophile for the past 4 years. Like, Trump raped Katie Johnson and then basically suppressed any information and intimidated her to the point where, she gave up her lawsuit. We that kind of shit happens all the time.
Right.
We accept
it. Happens.
We recognize it's fucked up. We don't do that about racism. We just don't.
I'm trying to see if thinking too much about what I'm about to say, because I think it still applies. I know it still applies, because for me individually, and I don't think maybe this is because I am a therapist and I can't separate that identity, but at the bottom line is, like, I do hold space for the fact that in order to get to that point, to do something to a child like that, and to be, what we as a pedophile, is that likely has happened to them. Mm-hmm. So when I save enough space not to endorse that like that it does go on. Do I forget at times because it goes on a lot? Absolutely. I mean, as we speak, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, like it comes down to like every individual has had their own experience to get, and that's built off of. I feel like if we forget that, then
I agree, and that's why you have to establish the baseline. The baseline is the beginning of all conversations about race, in my opinion, with new people. When you're dealing with like people who you've met before and you've already said like, okay, all right, I know how Sarah thinks, I know how Rachel thinks, or whatever. So we're good. Like I know where she's coming from. I know where she's coming from. So as we're having this dialogue, I know it's fruitful. I know when I know it's genuine. But if you're dealing with strangers and someone comes in, that baseline needs to be established. And a lot of people are just uncomfortable establishing the baseline because they don't want to talk about that, something like that with individuals they're not familiar with. So a certain amount of intimacy, has to exist, I guess, or be created in order to have that conversation.
Vulnerability.
Yeah,
you have to be willing to acknowledge that, like, oh shit, I'm wrong. Like, I mean, to the point where I've thought it was like, shit, am I wrong tonight? Like, I think, but I'm maybe I am. But from where I'm sitting, the evaluation I've done, like where I said, I feel like we were both saying very similar things. It was just we're just like slightly off the track on what we were talking about. But the messages still compare, and they're pretty much the same. Is that?
After the baseline is established, like everything you're saying is great because at that point, neuroplasticity, you've established that somebody's willing to be open to listen to shit. You can exchange information. You can talk about where you're coming from. You can talk about your respective experiences. I can throw in analogies. I can throw in metaphors. We can have a great exchange. We can get to the bottom of it and leave as more developed people and members of society. But if you have not created that safe space, if you have not created some level of intimacy, if you have not created some level of vulnerability, if you have not established that you're dealing with someone who's ready to do any of those things or participate in any of those spaces, then you are at that point, you are fulfilling the role, the objective of the racist who is among you. And that's either providing a platform for that person to speak or providing a space for that person to keep you from doing what needs to be done to fight racism.